pace of change quickens year by year. How the protection industry evolved from its birth more than 2 millennia ago vividly backs this point. Imagine yourself a fire expert with the Athenian army in 440 BC. Invaders charged the northern front, flinging fireballs and flaming arrows into your ranks. As the flames engulf warriors and tents, you rush to help with a water sack and hose. The sack is a dried ox bladder. The hose, the same ox's entrails. You press the bladder to force a water stream out the top intestines. Or, as a Roman firefighter, you have joined the first recorded fire brigade. To combat fires, you and several comrades pump the wooden beam that forces water out the nozzles of a double-barreled water cannon. More than 1,800 years later, as an early American fireman, you use a similar water-pumping cannon to quench the fire that so often afflicted this nation's wooden cities. Suddenly, the pace of change accelerates. In the 1800s, an automatic sprinkler deters the fire, and watchmen call the fire department to complete the job. Then the extraordinary chemicals, mercury and ether, trigger not mechanical, but electrical alarms, which evacuate the burning building and signal a monitoring station, which calls the fire department. Electricity revolutionizes the protection art. Alarms, central monitoring stations, and fire and theft sensors of every description use this energy and its child, the telegraph. You join a private firm and sell electrical protection as if it were the final, most effective security obtainable. Until the integrated circuit, computers, electronics make protection a new art altogether again. The mechanical age endured at least 2,400 years. The electrical age, about 100. The age of electronics, well, about 40 so far. The pace of change indeed quickens. Mechanical genius appeared in many early fire protection tools. The Romans and Greeks used syringe-like devices, which survived through the 17th century. British versions measured about 2.5 feet long, with a 1/2-inch nozzle. They were operated by 3 men. 2 held the body, while a third pushed the plunger. An 1835 fire that leveled much of New York City occasioned the first municipal fire protection system. Needing an early warning plan, city officials engineered a system of watchtowers, each about 125 feet tall, to serve as lookout posts. Imagine yourself a volunteer fireman for New York City in 1836, asleep at 2 o'clock in the morning. You hear a bell ringing through the streets. A watchman has spotted a fire, so you dress and race to the garage where the water cannon is kept. With fellow volunteers, you harness a team of horses to the water engine, mount the engine, and dash off in the direction of the water tower. Confused over the source of the bell, followed by the confused directions of the watchman, you lose valuable time en route to the scene of the fire. Finally, 1/2 hour late, you arrive at the building, which is by now nearly burned to the ground. So you proceed to save the adjacent buildings with buckets of water in the water cannon. You consider your job well done, knowing how rare it is to save the structure first afflicted by a fire. The limitations of man and his mechanisms are apparent in most early alarm systems. Then, electricity overcame these limitations in the 1850s, when someone invented the first electrical burglar alarm. We don't know who. The patent records show only Augustus R. Pope as the inventor of an improvement in electromagnetic alarms in 1853. Pope designed the system for private homes, fashioning metallic contacts for windows and doors. He wired the switches in open circuit, connecting them to a battery and vibrating bell. Pope, the inventor, was not a businessman, it seems. 4 years after patenting the alarm system, he sold it. The unlikely buyer was one Edwin Holmes of Boston, a Yankee notion store owner. Holmes was locally famous for being among the first to equip ladies' skirts with broad hoops. Holmes found his hoop skirt experience useful. He insulated his first copper wire with cotton, braided onto the wire at his hoop skirt factory. Holmes headquartered his business in New York City, where he figured many of the nation's burglars operated. But there he faced the sales problem of persuading homeowners that some black box contraption could ring a bell upstairs when a burglar breaks in through the basement window. He circumvented such skepticism with a demonstration model consisting of a small house with a bell mounted on top. After a decade of peace and prosperity in a virgin market, Holmes encountered some competition in the early 1870s. Edward Callahan, an early genius of business support services and the inventor of the stock market ticker, devised a district messenger and police patrol service in the late 1860s. He sold these ideas to the American District Telegraph Company of New York, formed in 1871 in order to apply his inventions. Following Callahan's design, ADT of New York placed call boxes in districts served by central offices. From the call boxes, businessmen summoned young messengers to run all kinds of errands, from delivering telegrams, stock certificates, and flowers to escorting elderly citizens. The call boxes could also summon policemen, firemen, or even messengers carrying fire extinguishers for lesser emergencies. ADT's business surged and led entrepreneurs in other cities to form similar enterprises. Most used the same name, except attaching their own city or state. Also, many of these firms began offering forms of central station burglar alarm service. In 1872, Holmes opened his first central station, deciding he needed to offer that form of protection to crack new markets, like banks and the jewelry stores on Maiden Lane. For these new customers, Holmes designed a paneled cabinet to encase and protect vaults. He lined these panels with foil and protected the doors with contacts. A major obstacle, though, threatened Holmes' central station venture. He needed means to route the alarm wires from subscribers' premises to his central office. Finally, he opted to lay his lines over rooftops throughout the city. He connected the lines to his central office from a scaffolding arrangement mounted on the roof of his own building. To monitor the systems, Holmes adapted the galvanometer, then used to measure current levels in electrical experiments. This device served Holmes by detecting current changes when burglars tampered with protected doors or when contacts or circuits failed. The early ADT firms gained a similar advantage using the McCullough loop circuit. The originator of this circuit is disputed because at least 3 McCulloughs, Chauncey, Lewis, and George, patented loop circuits during the late 1800s. Whoever invented it, the McCullough loop continued to operate with shorts, breaks, and grounds until repairs could be made. It moreover enabled firms to wire numerous systems on a single circuit, saving wire costs. By the mid-1870s, Holmes had opened central stations in New York City, Philadelphia, and in Boston at 342 Washington Street. The latter made history when it became the testing and sales site for the first telephones. Financial backers of Alexander Graham Bell needed a means to promote their talking box. Holmes' son, Edwin T., learned of this problem and donated the Boston office to help. He had alarm circuits installed to several banks around town. He connected these to telephones, with the central station acting as the switching point. This promotion lured entrepreneurs from across the country. After testing the device, many liked it enough to procure, for nothing, the rights to operate telephone outlets in their own regions. Holmes' son then decided to set up an express delivery service using telephones. Titled the Telephone Dispatch Company, the service leased 700 of the first 778 phones put into commercial use. In the late 1800s, all kinds of communications firms using telephones, telegraphs, and central offices expanded. They spread their lines across the cities, practically blocking the skies from a pedestrian's eyes. New York City ended this congestion by requiring communication firms to run their wires through ducts under the streets. While Holmes and the ADT firms improved burglar alarms, the Great Chicago Fire of 1871 put fire protection inventors to work. A New Haven, Connecticut piano maker, Henry S. Parmalee, was the first in this country to invent an automatic sprinkler and water flow alarm. Many of Parmalee's systems were installed by the Providence Steam and Gas Pipe Company, headed by Frederick Grinnell. Grinnell refined Parmalee's water flow alarm and sprinkler head. Later, he added valve innovations that made his company the nation's leading sprinkler parts manufacturer. Electricity was the force behind early fire warning alarms using bimetallic springs, mercury, ether, or air. These were thermostats, set to trigger an alarm when the room temperature exceeded a certain level, or when it increased at an abnormally high rate. When another Chicago fire devastated the city's Stockyard district in 1882, ADT of Chicago was called in to build a central station and special call boxes to monitor the area. This was the first central station built exclusively to provide fire protection. Charles Potter used central stations to monitor sprinklers and water flow alarms. For this service, he founded in 1898 the Potter Electric Signal Corporation in St. Louis. His early systems featured separate transmitters for each sprinkler and alarm in a subscriber's building. This enabled the operator to pinpoint the exact location of a fire by knowing which sprinkler or alarm had been triggered. When the 20th century turned, protection technology was well developed. Its major markets were tapped, and after years of localized growth, the industry became big business. Western Union in 1901 consolidated most of the local ADT firms. American Telephone and Telegraph bought Holmes' firm in 1905. Following business customs of the times, Holmes and ADT signed a contract in 1905, agreeing not to take business away from one another. There was a 5-year period from 1909 to 1914 when the American Telephone and Telegraph Company owned a controlling interest in both ADT and Holmes. This occurred when the telephone company bought 28% of Western Union stock. In responding to a public outcry, the United States Justice Department ordered AT&T to sell that stock in 1914. For the next 40 years, Holmes and ADT dominated the central station field. Mastering such technologies as the art of vault protection, they both developed a microphone detector to be mounted inside vaults that signaled the central station when it sensed the sound of an intruder breaking in. ADT gained a technological edge when Maxwell H.A. Lindsay left his physics post at MIT to join its engineering department. Shocked by a plague of burglaries in the 1930s, Lindsay decided to adapt the electric eye, then used mainly to open doors in railroad stations, into an anti-crime device. In the late 1930s, he readapted the electric eye to detect fires. This device became the prototype for photoelectric smoke detectors, which other firms developed later. The crime-intensive Prohibition era and the Great Depression lured many into the alarm field. The bootleggers and mobsters created a climate of fear and a battle for market for alarm sales. Many endured slow beginnings because alarm system suppliers were rare. Charles Thompson faced this predicament in Los Angeles when he abandoned his accounting business to sell local alarms, forming the United States Burglar Alarm Company in the 20s. For his first systems, he rigged bells using car brake drums and hammers. He fashioned contacts out of sheets of brass and bought relays from the Pacific Telephone Company. Later, he bought real bells from the local school system. Stuart and Sarah Jackson used a few brake drum hammer bells while trying to get Denver burglar alarms started in the 1930s. They even went to the kitchen cabinet to improve some of the equipment suppliers did provide. One notable innovation was the use of jam jars to protect relays from dirt and grime. In Cleveland, brothers Morris and Jack Weinstock were aspiring tradesmen out of work when they formed Morse Signal Devices. They started building a clientele while working part-time for their father Peter, a local butcher. When alarm revenues exceeded their weekly clerk's pay, they opened a storefront in downtown Cleveland. They demonstrated good business sense thereafter, building the enterprise through acquisitions. In Dallas, George Smith Sr., aided by his son's electrical engineering education, opened a central station in the 1930s. Smith Alarm Systems thereby became one of the first independent protection firms to offer central station service. In the East, the concept of hooking alarms directly into police and fire stations emerged in the 1920s. Originated by Victor O. Zahn of the Victor Burglar Alarm Company, the direct connect idea spread across the country in the 20s and 30s. Alarm company business boomed during World War II as contracts to fire and burglar-proof munitions factories, government buildings, and research labs rolled in. Put yourself in the position of Gus Schwartz and Frank Polson of Chicago's Certified Burglar Alarm. On March 30th, 1944, they got from the Manhattan District of the United States War Department an order for door disturbance alarms to protect some labs and buildings at the University of Chicago. Thinking it an odd request, you go ahead with it anyway and receive $100. Only later do you find out you guarded one of the research sites for this nation's first atomic bomb. Alarm firms indeed made a decisive contribution to the war effort. Now, put on the boots of Ben Call, president of Call's Police Signal Corporation. It's 1946, and alarm supplies are rare. Many independents like yourself need reliable suppliers who can provide standardized equipment at reasonable rates. After pondering the situation, you light upon the idea of forming a trade association, just the vehicle for coordinating bulk purchases of reliable alarm systems. You round up about 20 fellow independents and hold a convention in February 1948 at Chicago's Sherman Hotel. Hosted by Frank Polson, the affair turns into an 11-day marathon meeting of suspicious strangers, each fear that others will steal his trade secrets. Yet the supply arrangements work out well. The major independent manufacturers, Potter Electric, A.W. Frew of Chicago, and New York's Ademco, agree to work with association members on equipment purchases and problems. At later conventions, the suppliers build exhibits to educate and sell members on their systems. Indeed, during the early years, the association's most vital role was to help members buy quality systems so crucial to success. Honoring Ben Call's efforts, the members make him the association's first president. At the third meeting in Colorado Springs, the members select a name for their group, the National Burglar and Fire Alarm Association. Through the 50s and 60s, NBFAA members enjoyed the friendship of Sam Bagnall, the Thomas Edison of the protection industry, whose 54 patents included one of the ultrasonic alarm. Bagnall worked beside a top electrical engineer, Frank Giebert of the Newark District Telegraph, who's a life member of NBFAA, as is Ben called. They nursed the ultrasonic alarm through many problems. Bagnall finally received a patent in 1952. The ultrasonic alarm brought a new era in space protection, providing much broader security to any room it protected by creating a web of ultrasonic waves. Bagnall attended many NBFAA conventions, contributed articles, always sharing his knowledge with the members. For these services, he was honored by NBFAA. After years of dedicated research, he died in 1972. In the 1960s, the sophisticated ionization detectors entered the fire protection marketplace. First conceived in Switzerland, this device was refined by the firm Cerberus and later by Walter Kidde. The computer is the newest technology to upgrade alarm systems. Pioneered by Smith Alarm Systems, ADT, and others, computerized central stations are doubling subscriber capacity while improving protection service. Big business dominance in the central station field peaked in the 1950s when Grinnell bought a controlling interest in ADT, Holmes, and Automatic Fire Alarm of New York City. As a result of antitrust litigation in the 1960s that reached the U.S. Supreme Court, Grinnell spun off its holdings in the other three firms. With the doors opened, the alarm industry fast emerged a free enterprise model. Dozens of entrepreneurs, along with large corporations, brought mind-splitting diversity to the field in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Baker Industries, a conglomerate, bought Wells Fargo to ease its start in the central station field. Other newcomers included Honeywell. Then it seemed the government wanted to help business combat crime by promoting the use of alarm services. But such intentions led the United States Senate and the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration to entertain ideas of regulating the industry. Such thoughts emerged in response to a 1969 government report entitled Crimes Against Small Business, which concluded that while alarm systems are invaluable to small firms, they cost too much. Amid talk of turning the alarm industry into a quasi-public utility, industry leaders came together to protect their interests, forming the Ad Hoc Alarm Industry Committee for Combating Crime. The AICCC testified before the Senate Small Business Committee, arguing against proposals to put police departments in the business of selling, installing, and operating central station systems. AICCC Chairman George Smith, Jr. testified, "Who would refuse to buy alarm protection from a burly detective from the local police force? Private alarm firms shouldn't have to deal with such public competition." It took about 3 years of effort by the AICCC and its members, including the NBFAA and the Central Station Electrical Protection Association, to convince the government to drop its plan to regulate. At the urging of the NBFAA, the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration formed the Private Security Advisory Council. This group conducted fruitful research into the false alarm problem, relations between public and private protection officials, and the licensing of alarm firms. To further the alarm industry's fight against crime and fire, the Alarm Industry Research and Educational Foundation was founded in 1978 under the sponsorship of the NBFAA. The foundation was established to respond to the need for increased research and educational efforts in the areas of crime and fire prevention. The foundation quickly took on a life of its own, and in 1984 was recognized by the Internal Revenue Service as a separate tax-exempt organization. The late 1970s found independent alarm companies throughout the country faced with a number of local regulatory problems. Onerous false alarm ordinances and municipal licensing found alarm companies joining together locally in action groups to fight these problems. These groups evolved into local and statewide alarm associations. The NBFAA carefully monitored and encouraged this industry solidarity so that when approached by the local alarm association in Cincinnati, it was ready and proud to recognize it as NBFAA Chapter 1 in a chapter program that has proved to be a dynamic force within the NBFAA. In recognition of this growth, a bylaws change was enacted whereby the regional directors from each of the NBFAA regions are directly elected by the chapters in that region. These directors are members of the NBFAA Executive Committee, providing two-way communication and representation for their chapter members. The 1980s brought significant changes to the structure of the alarm industry. The word of the 1980s has been acquisition, often said with a British accent. Some of the great independent alarm companies, such as Morse Signal of Los Angeles and Chicago's Certified Burglar Alarm, were acquired in an acquisition binge that at first seemed to have no end. By the mid-1980s, the acquisition fever, while still active, seemed to have slowed, with new players, such as National Guardian of Stamford, Connecticut, active, while some of the originals in the acquisition fury gone from the scene. The British invasion, with the Hawley's Group acquisition of Electro Protective Corp. And others, as well as Security Center's acquisition of New York's Jewelers Protection, Holmes, Supreme, Varigard, and others, marked the first large-scale introduction of foreign ownership in the U.S. alarm industry. In spite of acquisitions in the 1980s, the NBFAA experienced unprecedented growth in chapters and members. Common problems, changing technology, and a general maturity of the industry saw membership grow from hundreds to now well over 3,000 regular and chapter members. The chapter program, with over 50 affiliated chapters, grows at a dynamic rate. The Central Station Electrical Protection Association, a small but highly effective group of mostly NBFAA members who operate UL-approved central stations, has maintained the dialogue with the telephone industry through their painful divestiture. New alarm transmission technology, such as derived channel, a piggyback-type service, shows great promise for the future. While the outcome is still unclear, the fact that the alarm industry is facing a new chapter in telephone company relations is clear. The increasing complexity of today's alarms, combined with the need for nationwide recognized standards for local and state licensing purposes, was identified by the NBFAA. Created to answer that need was the NBFAA National Training School. Adopting and building upon an original curriculum created by the Alarm Association of Florida, an NBFAA chapter member, the school now is a dramatic success, with thousands of graduates and classes being held regularly by NBFAA chapters throughout the country. Independently, the National Burglar and Fire Alarm Association has researched and acted on industry issues over the past decade. Alarm companies found themselves with the unfair competition of local municipalities directly involved in the installation of alarm systems. Under the capable guidance of NBFAA counsel Lessing Gold, the legal voice of the NBFAA for over 2 decades, industry response was swift. Cable TV companies also posed a threat by using their cable TV franchise as an unfair competitive tool in the alarm business. Vigorous NBFAA coordinated chapter and industry efforts, led by industry senior statesman Norman Rubin, long a champion of alarm industry causes, brought these matters to successful conclusions. As a member of Congress said recently, if there were a Hall of Fame for lobbyists, the alarm industry would have a bronze statue. With many battles won, and more no doubt on the horizon, we face the next decade and the next century, knowing that we belong to a united, vigorous industry with a proud past and an exciting future.